So I am actually going to start the session because we're not going to take a break now. Yeah. Do you want to do it, Zoe? No, I don't want to be too fascist. We're going to plow on. Could I have your attention, folks? Thanks. We are actually just moving on straight to the last session. That may mean we break a little early, but hopefully that's to your advantage, especially as it may be snowing outside. So the final session here, well, let me start this a different way. This has been an incredibly collaborative process, building and running this conference. And so we wanted to have the whole organizing committee up here running this. So first, I really want to start with a massive thank you to all of them. Someone I know said to me a long time ago that co-authoring, and in a sense what we've done here is a giant co-authoring exercise. Co-authoring is a bit like traveling together with somebody. You either cement a friendship or you break it. And I think that this has really cemented some friendships here, at least at an institutional, and I'd like to think also at personal level, because all of the members of the organizing committee have approached this exercise with a view to the common good, not to the narrow or private good, if I can put it that way. And that is, I think, the spirit in which, and I won't speak for the organizing committee, but I get the sense that, and they'll speak for themselves and confirm or deny this, the spirit in which we hope to continue. That we would really like to continue this effort, this not just a conversation, but I call it an effort because we want to see action with a view to the common good. But as we've just been talking about, that is easier said than done in some ways. So what I've been put on the hot seat to do, I think, is to try and offer a few reflections on what we might do, what we've heard from the last day or two about areas that seem to bubble up, areas for action that seem to have bubbled up, and how we might begin thinking about continuing this discussion and effort. But please see my remarks as a very partial knee-jerk reaction to the last 2 days. The organizing committee will then chime in and add their own thoughts, but we would like to hear from all of you one last time. In particular, are there issues that we should focus our efforts on organizing around going forward, or processes or steps we should be taking to advance collaborative problem solving? That's the title of this session. So let me offer my own personal, very partial and quick thoughts on that question. How do we advance collaborative problem solving in this area? I'm really, really struck by Phil's idea that what we need to think about is how we turn ourselves from a community of interest to a community of intent. And I'm going to use that as my framing because I think one of the things it really helps reveal or uncover is we must define our intent extremely clearly. And that has come up time and again over the last 2 days in different language. Sometimes people have talked about having different use cases for our data. This afternoon, I think it was Jessica said we need to clarify the value proposition. Or in the research context, it's a question of defining the research question. Now, these are actually three slightly different things. They're all different ways of framing different types of intent, and in fact, they are different intents. I don't think we have to choose amongst them, but we do, if we want to try and do all those things, understand how they relate to each other, how specific research questions that we might mobilize around are going to tie to specific use cases, and what the value proposition of any given use case is for different users, or indeed different suppliers of information, or indeed for other stakeholders, such as survivors. So I think there is a question there of how do we actually organize a process to define a common intent. It's not quite what we were trying to do the last day or two. This was more exploratory and brainstorming. I think the next step would probably be a process where we capture and crystallize that and make a few choices. And I think what we've heard over the last day or two is we probably need an even broader group, in some senses, than we have here in order to do that in a way that's going to be legitimate and sustainable. There must be an emphasis on active engagement of survivors. It's been wonderful to have survivors here. I hope that one or two or more of you may yet pipe up in the remaining session. Please, we actively encourage your engagement and input on these questions of what we should be focusing on. We're going to need to think carefully about potential users of any tools we might develop. And I think we've heard, especially in the last few hours, we probably need funders in the room thinking as funders to understand that value proposition from their perspective. So there's a process of intent definition, I think, that we would first need to undertake. And then once we understand the intent, then we can start mapping out roads, as Phil put it. How do we pay for those roads? Or pathways to getting there. And I think very important there is going to be thinking through what I would call a hierarchy of research needs. So what are the first things we need to be able to crack in order to then get to second order questions and third order questions? And I would like to slightly nervously, given the research expertise in the room, take a little bit of a crack at doing that, just to get your juices flowing from what I've heard in the last couple of days. It seems to me that there's, first of all, two central questions around data standards and collection frameworks, as Harry talked about at some length and others, and secondly, around data sharing infrastructure, that are really predicate questions that we need to think about at the beginning in order to then go forward and collaborate around data. And we've heard a number of ideas this afternoon on the second point about data sharing infrastructures. Clearly there are a number of things going on, the IBM platform, we have Delta 8.7, we have others that might provide the seed for some kind of data sharing infrastructure or might not. It seems to me that there would need to be a specific inquiry, in a sense, over the next 6 to 12 months to really try and crack that from an organizational perspective. Is there a way to build a data sharing infrastructure that could actually form a platform for collaborative problem solving? And that, it seems to me, connects to what I would call phase 2, which is what do we want to use that for? And I heard at least 4 things bubble up over the last day or two across different thematic areas. So one was imagery analysis. A lot of talk about satellite imagery, but it was also popping up in many other places. For example, how do we recognize hotels that victims are being trafficked in and through, for example. So there might be a whole area of work around imagery analysis. Second, case tracking. There might be a whole area of work around sharing data about cases to understand how we track them while respecting privacy, security, and other needs. Third, huge recurring theme, risk modeling and mapping. And multiple different ways we could understand risk and different use cases for risk. And fourth, and I'm glad James raised it again at the end there, a set of questions around small data and data collation and integration. And maybe we need different techniques for thinking about those kinds of data sets than we do for other data sets. So those are just 4 that I heard recurring. There absolutely will be others. Once we then work through that phase, we might then, I think, be able to get to a discussion about impact metrics and modeling of the effectiveness of the measures, to come back to target 8.7. I don't think we can jump into M&E discussions about programming until we've gone through those first 2 phases. We need to understand risk before we can understand impact, or potentially prevalence to understand impact in target 8.7 terms. And we need to have, going back to phase 1, we need to have a framework for being able to compare data and share data before we can do those phase 2 things. So it seems to me that there might be a way, and maybe this is not quite the right hierarchy, but there is a way potentially to break this down into a hierarchy. I don't know how long each of those phases would be. Maybe they're different lengths, maybe they're 3 years each. But it seems to me that that starts to give us some kind of not only conceptual but potentially organizational structure around which to build a shared and articulated and announced agenda And once we then have a shared agenda or strategy, then we can think about how we embed that in our own actions and how we use our joint capabilities to mobilize or align resources around that strategy. So, for example, once we have a sense that, okay, for the next 3 years, we've agreed to focus more on this set of problems, then we can structure our academic research positions, our student activities, our joint research funding applications, or even just coordinated programming. We can structure potential Code 8.7 events around those priorities, and sharing an agenda or an articulated set of priorities, we can go to funders, to users, to tech organizations and say, as a collective, these are our priorities for the next 3-4 years. You don't have to take that as marching orders, but it does give you access to a community not only of interest, but of intent, to bring it back to the beginning. So those are my reflections after 2 incredibly rich days. Thank you all, and I guess we turn over now to members of the organising committee. So who'd like to kick us off? Maybe I'll just start with Zoe and come around, and then we'll throw the floor open for comments.
Thank you. I thought those were fantastic comments, and I'd be really keen to embrace a conversation now actually about the data sharing infrastructure ideas and a conversation about those 4 potential research themes or phases that you laid out. I'd also be really keen to hear from people here if they would like for Code 8.7 to not just be this great 2-day event, but in this organising committee we've gone back and forth and had conversations about, is this actually a new working group? Could it exist for 2 to 3 years? If so, could we convene at least annually or every 6 months and have quite thematic, focused workshops that might be preceded by a particular report that we're working on and then circulated and debated and pushed out and would have policy relevance? We don't have fixed ideas at all about that, either as a shape or that as a... We certainly don't have ideas about the topics that we'd want those working group meetings to focus on or reports. I think from my own perspective, and I guess that of the Rights Lab, but I would like to pass to both Doreen and James to fill in some of these gaps. I'd be really intrigued to see, certainly Delta 8.7, talking now a bit more about the data sharing and maybe data trust opportunities. That conversation we had earlier today about the idea of a data trust I thought was really fascinating, and the IBM presentation returned to that. Delta 8.7 does brilliant work at the moment with data sharing and data visualization. Could it also start to take on a bit of a role of being a global data trust, data bank? I wonder what James would think about that. And if we're asking Delta 8.7 to do the work of data trust, is it Code 8.7's role then with all of you to be doing the data operationalization? And are these 2 quite different things, and should they be kept separate? I was really struck yesterday by Andrew Zolli's vision of what he's calling a global observatory. If you heard his talk, you will have heard him say that Planet is mapping the whole world every day. It has, after the US, Russia and China, the next organization down is Planet in terms of how much satellite imagery it's producing. It would take, I think he said, 6 million people to just manually look at a day's worth of images, I think, that Planet is producing. So there is no way to deal with that imagery except with AI. As I understand it, but Doreen could say more, his vision is Planet can offer out all of that imagery, and he would be encouraging other private sector companies to offer out mobile phone data and financial data and other private sector data. I feel like Experian might be here in the room, and we've had conversations with them about their data uses. And then there is the computational and AI community that would be able to do amazing things with that vast data set. Just as a small example of how we've very recently operationalized, we've been working very closely with Freedom Fund, which is a global NGO that has a hotspot model. They were looking to expand their North India hotspot out of the 600 existing communities where they work, asked us to do satellite mapping, but also combine that with a lot of other data sets across census data, educational attainment data, gender violence data, to give them a really layered sense of what their priorities should be going forward for the next 3 years of their North India program. And that was a very exciting piece of work to do, and it for us was a moment where finally all this satellite imagery had a real operational purpose. So you could imagine this global observatory, if we all wanted to be part of it, taking that kind of role in a much more scaled up way. So I'm interested if people would like to debate that, but I might take that moment to pass to Doreen for anything else she wants to say in that area.
Thank you, Zoe. I was going to pick up on that point of the planet vision, but also to throw it out more widely. There are a number of satellite providers out there. It's not just Planet. We don't want this to be perhaps just a monopoly, if you like. So we need to think about how we, from the satellite imagery point of view, but also from the drone UAV point of view, how we engage with the data providers, and how that data then is shared, and what sort of model do we want to adopt in terms of sharing that data. But equally, then we face a situation where we have a data-rich platform, for example, based on remotely sensed data. But who uses it? Who interprets it? How do we take that forward? How do NGOs understand what that data can provide? So I think there's a role for us to come up with some answers there. But I also think there's the role for universities. James, you mentioned education. That's really important, because my background coming into this is from a purely physical geography, environmental point of view. And I've found the last 2 days really fascinating in terms of switching domains from that background where I've been formally taught to a modern slavery arena where I'm having to learn very, very quickly about what's important, what the barriers are, and so on. And I think there's I think that is a barrier in that we teach our students in particular stylos that may not be easily transferred from one to the other.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you said. So both me and Doreen don't come from a modern slavery background at all. And Anjali, I know you come from forensics, different backgrounds. And at the University of Nottingham, the Right Slab has got such a presence, and I hope it's okay to mention this, but essentially Zoe beaconises people. It's called a beacon, we cut across. And she goes and talks to people in other areas, and it's actually, it's quite intimidating when she does it, and you have very little choice about whether you're actually going to join the Right Slab or not, but it's for the forces of good in the long run. But it is a really effective method, because talented people from different areas, forensics, geography, computer science, are coming together now in something that makes it more vibrant, more interesting, joins communities together, because this is a topic area rather than traditional research area. And I think maybe as a program committee, we can start thinking how we can spread that out to other universities too. So I think that's the main thing that I would take from this. It's really good to see all these different communities coming together in this area.
And I guess I'd love to piggyback off that for my comments as well. I guess that really gets to a couple I think we've shared a lot of great takeaways, so I'll try not to duplicate them here, but I think that got to one of my key thoughts over the past 2 days was changing the status quo of how we're actually enabling key actors to attack the problem. And I think that the Rights Lab is doing a really fantastic job of setting the stage for this by pulling in such disparate or different areas of expertise to tackle the problem and creating it in a kind of cohesive, safe space. And so I think that's a great starting point right there, but I'd love to also consider the provision of funding, the private sector partnerships, both in terms of expertise and capacity building, as well as the proper research and data, the real key questions that we need to answer to create those roads or pathways forward. And then secondarily, I'd love to consider bridging those divides to the private sector actors. And I think that's where Tech Against Trafficking, and Phil, I'd invite you to comment as well, can really come in, and making sure that there's a seat at the table for the private sector, as well as as well as some of the funding partners that we've been talking about. At the risk of over-expanding the table, I do think, to your point, James, about broadening out who's in the room, it could really add to the vision that we have for the longer term. And then 3, creating platforms for collaboration and shared learning. And at Tech Against Trafficking, this is something that we've really been talking a lot about recently, trying to create a space where disparate efforts working in different geographies, working with different populations and different technology can all connect. Because right now, we did a landscape mapping of tech tools and found over 200, probably closer to 250 different applications of technology. At one point, I think 70 of them had the exact same goal. So what does that say about how much we're already communicating with each other? I'd love to create more of a structured environment where these groups can actually communicate, learn, share in a protected private space, which doesn't sound like an easy endeavor, but it would be great to get it started. And then 4th, and my closing point would just be, I'd love to also take away this focus on action orientation or actionability of what we're actually working on. And I think as Doreen and Andrew pointed out yesterday, data and research is only as good as the people using it, and that we have to make sure that we're putting this in the right hands and that it has a true focus on what the end outcome will be. And so I'd really like to just end at least my session here with just a call to make sure that we are thinking about that long-term vision, keeping it in the back of our minds, and have that action orientation to make sure that research or data groups, as Killian pointed out earlier, don't just continue a conversation, but really lead to actionable change.
So I wanted to come back to James's 2 phases. So phase 1 as defined as kind of the data sharing, and phase 2 as what it's for. And I guess I would encourage us to think about having those phases operate concurrently. Because I think it's really important to identify those actionable questions for the data. Similarly with the road analogy, which I think is brilliant, I think we want to be careful that we don't build the roads to the places that we don't need to go to. We have a potential danger of investing in infrastructure that may not necessarily be useful. So I think having that concurrent, continuous loop with asking what the question is, what are we trying to do, what are really the challenges that are being addressed. I really appreciate it in terms of incentives. Just something resonated for me from the previous session when Sophia from IBM said it's the purpose alongside profit, right? Which to me says that there's an opportunity to build incentive models that are not instead of profit, but consistent with it. The other thing that I would say is sort of coming back, and I will defer to Dan for more remarks on the research side of things, is if we're truly serious about building a long-term basic research agenda, the focus has to be broader than what are the questions today. So that comes back to Shannon's point from yesterday on what are the unknown unknowns that we're thinking about as a community. And I think that would enable us to think about what are some of the broader questions.
Well, I think everything so far has been so well put, it's difficult to add on too much, but I'll just say a couple things. First of all, I envision the activity that we have, or visualize it, I guess, as a complicated machine with a lot of gears that are turning at different speeds. Some of them are turning fairly rapidly, some of them are turning more slowly, sort of towards the outer parts of the machine, but that's fine, I think. Everyone's got something to contribute, every organization's got something to add to the machine, as long as the central core of the machine is making steady progress toward the goal that we all agree on, which I think is exactly the right way to phrase it. I was going to say something, I think Nadia almost covered it already, but data is absolutely foundational. The data standards, data sharing, totally foundational, but we should never lose the opportunity to consider the research challenges that might arise anywhere. So at the same time, while we need the data standards, data sharing in place, we should also use it as an opportunity to identify challenges looking towards the future. So we might not be totally satisfied with what we're able to do right now, and rather than just pull away and say we can't do it or settle for something that maybe is a little bit second best, actually put that into our portfolio of the challenges that we would like to look at, because we'll undoubtedly discover some challenges there as well, which is great. I think we should actually embrace that kind of challenge. So.
Thank you. So I think what you're hearing... yes, of course. Sorry.
I mean, it's kind of, I'm pretty much just going to echo what Nadia and Dan said. I think the key thing, though, really is that we need to look broadly. We need to look long term. I think it was actually characterized yesterday. You know, we've got a lot of solutions that are dealing with SMS, but are we going to be using SMS in 2 years? So I think we need to be very careful not to just say, what are the tools, what are the problems, let's create solutions, but really, what are the long-term problems and how are we going to continue to work? And that's why we also need to work with a broader population, because there are other people creating new technologies, and that's where really the continued basic research comes in. So my big stress would be anything we do needs to, almost going back to Nadia's comment on the Heilmeyer Catechism, we need to look at, I mean, the long-term goal we have is making major change by 2030. What are the intermediate steps along the way that will help ensure we're working towards that goal? So I think we really need to keep that broad perspective, bringing in even more people than are in the room now, and then how are we going to ensure that we're getting there along the way?
It's somewhat hard to be the last person because everyone's already said everything. So it is just echoing what everyone has already said. And I guess while I absolutely do believe in echoing the perspective of thinking longer term and bringing in a broader stakeholder, I also think we need to determine where we're going to really put those focused efforts into and think about sort of, I don't know if we want to say milestones, but areas where, you know, this is what we can do in, say, 6 months that's sort of actionable and shows, you know, some impact, if you want to say. And sort of the longer term, sort of 2-3 year, and then the even more longer horizon and what we can do from that sort of perspective as well. And I guess in saying that too, that's something that I can say from the touring perspective, we tend to take on, and it's the way that we work in part because we partner with government and charitable organizations and industry partners where we look at what can we do in that short-term period and then longer term and build that out. And to think about also while we're here is what can we do as a community together and where are those priorities, not just in terms of research questions, but potentially support. So one of it is, you know, all these tools that are coming out. Which ones are really valid and appropriate to be used in different spaces? So as, you know, we're talking about open data, there's open tools, and ensuring that the people who start using them know how to use them properly, know how to interpret those results. And so I think those are also the conversations that we need to be having, what we can do and coming together on that, the language that's potentially used. So I throw those all out there.
Great, thank you. So I think what you all hear there from the organising committee is a pretty strong signal of intent to figure out a way to take this forward. In operational terms, I suspect what that means is that we will endeavour to actually come back to you with something in writing soon-ish to articulate how we might go through that process of crystallising a process. It's all getting very meta. It's been a long 2 days. But there are two things there's one thing I really want to stress there, which is that this is a self-organising committee, but it is by no means closed. If there are others who wish to take an active leadership role in mobilising this discussion going forward, we are keen to hear from you right now and or into the future. We, I think, have been trying very hard as a group to listen to others and understand what is the demand here that we're trying to respond to. So I'm going to open the floor one last time. While you all think of that, I see one hand from Steve. Okay, several hands. I actually have a housekeeping announcement. I've been asked by my team to ask if there's anybody who is going immediately to JFK and would be prepared to be entrusted with a passport to deliver to somebody who is at JFK but without their passport. Could you please signal to, yes, Jessica? Okay. Could you speak to Emily, who's right behind you? Fantastic, thank you. Okay, that was simple. Well done, great trust building. Yeah. All right, so several people want to jump in. Thank you very much. Please do signal with your mic light. Please keep your intervention short. I am sure people would like to get out of here a bit early, but we're keen to have one last round of input. So I'm going to start on the left with Steve and then come around, or come right around.
Firstly, just want to say thank you for an excellent couple of days and thank you for the organising. I'm sure it's no mean feat to put something together so quickly. I think, personally, maybe speaking on behalf of the people, I think to have some sort of governance committee out of the people sat here, I think I would personally welcome that. But I realise I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of the people there. And one of the things I think a really useful role could play is in sort of quality assurance. So I know from my own PhD research, there's a lot of algorithms that are computationally impressive but sociologically very crude, and particularly if we're talking at the kind of scale that we're talking about, there's the potential to cause great harm. And that's particularly around things like sentiment analysis, which is, I think, should be, and I can go into more detail if you like. But then also, there's another, speaking parochially, we're developing a methodology at the moment, we're looking at risk modelling, and we're trying to find out a way to know if we're heading in the right direction, and we're asking the kind of questions, and we're modelling it in the way that we think is appropriate. So there's two kinds of quality assurance that I think would be welcome and could be a real purpose for this committee. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming around this way, any takers? Yes, please, Carolyn.
Hi, so I'm Carolyn Huang. I'm from the U.S. Department of Labor, the International Labor Affairs Bureau. I believe that I'm one of the underrepresented organizations that belongs to a funding government organization. And while I can't make any commitment about my participation in future groups or even funding, I do want to just echo some thoughts as a researcher in a funding organization. And I think two things, like it's been mentioned that there needs to be a narrowing of focus to identify the role and functions of this group, and then also a broadening as well to make sure that it's inclusive and you incorporate the proper stakeholders. So I think in terms of if there's a potential effort to develop a research agenda, I would encourage more participation from similar government funding organizations. Because as a participant on two interagency groups focused on trafficking, I will say that they have my colleagues have very specific research questions that they're interested in for policy and programmatic purposes. And I think if the group is amazingly interdisciplinary, but if there's no intersection, you're going to perpetuate the issue that's being discussed, which is how do you bring in the funders? So just some thoughts, and thinking about future membership of this organization and who you might want to involve. I would encourage you to seek out similar partners. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. And you've been very humble there in not bragging about DOL's funding of ILO to actually develop research agenda thinking over the next year or two in the broader context of Target 8.7. But it seems to me that if this group goes through a research agenda definition exercise focused specifically on the tech aspect of that, it needs to try to connect up with that broader ILO exercise, and we at UNU, which are also connected to that exercise, would be happy to try and help with that knitting. I'm going to keep coming around this way, sweeping my radar. Are there any pings? Going. Yes, please. Then I'll come to Louise. No, Louise second. This lady first. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. It will turn red if you there we go.
Okay. Cross-disciplinary meetings like this are so valuable, and what it tells us is that the AI people don't have to become social scientists, and the social scientists don't need to become AI people. We need to know enough about each other that we can talk and understand where we need to go as a group. So what I would suggest, since we are talking about playing not only the near game, but also the long game, is taking advantage of the fact that universities are requiring increasing education of undergraduates in data, computing, data science. And if we can create, for example, courses in data science for non-majors, which take compelling sets of data, for example, this, then we may find that we are teaching people who are interested in social sciences earlier about data, get them more engaged, and maybe some of them even flip and have a double major like Mr. Goulding here. So that would be a suggestion for the faculty, not CCC and CRA, which are at the top end of the university ecosystem, but at the entry level.
Great, really helpful. Thank you. Louise.
There's so many wonderful people in this room, and I've met some of them just through serendipity, and I'm wondering if there's some follow-up that we can have of who was here with us, whether people will share their information and their organizations so that we can network with each other afterwards. That would be terrific. Secondly, I'm a little concerned about this idea that we're moving towards the elimination of slavery, because all my research is showing that thanks to this new technology, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media, thanks to climate change, mass displacement, this phenomenon is growing. It's not diminishing, it's growing. And the question that we should be asking ourselves is not how we're reducing this 9,000 a day, but how we're stemming its phenomenal growth and how we need to engage the tech community and the people using technology, like ride services and others, and force them in different ways to be part of this alliance and to be providing data and working with them to do this. I was one of the people who helped testify on the Hill last year before, in July, Congress forced online platforms to be responsible for human trafficking, because up until this summer, they had a free pass on this, which has led to a phenomenal growth of it. But it needs to be defined more broadly of what the technology community is doing. And maybe if we're talking about an alliance, we should be identifying the hotspots in the technology community that are facilitating this growth and come up with a strategy that involves them and finds ways that they have to use algorithms and other activities to stem their enabling role in this skyrocketing phenomenon. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. On the first point about networking, I think there's been a pretty clear indication that people see a networking function here in what we've got going, and maybe even a matchmaking function in some senses. However, I will say 4 things about that. I just want to make sure she hears. Louise? The 4 things I would say on the networking are GDPR. So we are happy to get your consent to have your information shared with each other, but we will not share it without your consent, as that's not the use case that we stated when we collected it in the first place. All right, thank you. Swinging my radar around, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for 2 great days of learning a lot. Meetings like this are, of course, the best option to get to know people and to learn about many different topics. So my comment is a kind of question/request. The second best is to have a webinar series or somehow some kind of communication in which we can share not only the needs, but also what kind of new advancement, new methodologies, new research has been done so that we can all learn from it and, well, not duplicate work, and also being able to match needs and research efforts.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Follow-up question to those that are presenting databases, Dan and Harry and Sophia, because I know within the confines of our upcoming research that we're doing, when we talk about the incentivizing, for people to participate, I know that the magnitude of data that we're collecting among 29 stakeholder groups, again, we're frontline data collection for stakeholders, we want every stakeholder group to monetize that data. So we want 100% of our data to be available. And so we have looked at online databases to be able to share all of our data to be available to the public at large. We've not quite seen the features that we would like available, so we have gotten quotes for what it would cost for us to create our own database, not only for the private sector, nonprofits, but also for academia. Because within our 53 reports that we'll be releasing after the National Outreach Survey, it's literally a general overview of the data. We want the academic field to go in and disseminate that data because we want all of our data to be monetized. But my question is, within the data sharing agreements, even as I was talking with my new colleague here at the Interpol and just saying, listen, one of our stakeholder groups is law enforcement, local, state, and federal. This is how it's going to be able to help Interpol. And I told him, I said, I hope that the data that we collect is going to help you. We had someone from a university earlier ask, well, are you going to sell your data? No, we want to collect all the data from, and to our knowledge, I think that we'll be introducing a new data set to the entire anti-trafficking movement, because I don't know any organization across the globe that is centrally focused on frontline data to where we'll even be repeating the National Outreach Survey every 2 years. So again, to my question, for those that have an existing database, for those that know that we're going to have a magnitude of data available that we want to be utilized and monetized by every stakeholder group, within that data sharing agreements, I would love, and I know this may not be the time for it, but I'd love follow-up from any one of you all just to share your perspective of whether, we should institute our own database to make that available or share all of our data within all of those different databases that are available. So real interested in that feedback.
Thank you. I think we'll take that as a question for offline reaction from anybody on the organizing committee that wants to. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Talking. My name is Casey Lemas. I'm from Northeastern University. And we've been talking a lot about broadening our view while keeping it narrow. And as we think about broadening it, right, but we've been doing this successfully with individuals from my background in systems and industrial engineering and with individuals in social science. So thinking about having a big plan about what would you like to achieve, but then starting very small with these small test cases and getting small amounts of funding to see what type of data is available and can that actually answer your questions. So as we think broad, I encourage us to not just think about the AI community from a STEM perspective, but also look at who else has technological resources and methodological resources. So that might mean reaching out to us in systems engineering or operations research and seeing how that bridge can be gapped as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Anybody who can both broaden their view while keeping it narrow is a very welcome addition to our skill set. The radar is swinging around, and I wanted to ask if the youth has anything to say. Can I just say, I don't know what your incentives for participation were, but you have been listening the whole day. It's just so impressive. Anything you want to add?
Yes. So I got, my name is Jacob Long, and I go to AMBS, which is a school in New Jersey, and I do the Model UN, and my committee deals with like technology, like topics like this, and my solution is to teach kids and youth in like schools and stuff about, technology and stuff. So, yeah, that's what
drafted into the organizing committee. So thanks so much for being with us, and that's really helpful feedback. Thank you very, very much. Coming around, yes, you've been very patient, sir. Yep, you.
Thank you. My name is Maddie. I'm from Icon Compliance Services. I'm a senior data analyst, and just wrap up my idea. After 2 years, participate from Grace Farm 2 years ago, start this process. When we are talking about slavery and modern slavery and human trafficking, in fact, we're talking about global issues, and if we want to resolve this global issue, we need to global contributions, not just limited to tech companies or NGOs. We really need to involve more players and industries such as telecommunications companies, transportation companies, logistic companies, healthcare, insurance, and pharmaceutical companies. Maybe you ask why? Because they are harvesting relevant data constantly at the course of their businesses, and we need to, because we need to connect more relevant data to improve our algorithm to resolve this problem. And maybe ask how. We can escalate concept of donating data, such as donating money, donate time, as a social responsibilities. We need promote this concept, not just for using their data, also creating mutual interest to allow them to talk about as their achievement and contribution to fighting modern slavery and human trafficking as their social responsibilities. This helps dialogues about modern slavery and human trafficking comes up to the surface of society, and fighting to modern slaveries and human trafficking transform to the valuable activities. It have two advantages. First, more people and companies join this movement, and this increase public awareness. And second, this increased cost of destabilized countries by other countries, which is one of the main causes of modern slavery and human trafficking. Look at Syria and other countries. If we want to solve this problem, our solution should address the cause of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very creative ideas there on incentive structures. We really appreciate it. Killian.
I'll keep this quick. As the internal optimist, I actually am very encouraged by this group, and I am struck by the organizing capacity of this organization to set some standards. And so the external pessimist in me says a great role for this organization could be to try and figure out what are the principles or standards when it comes to data collection on this specific issue. And I'm reminded of kind of 3 examples where this has happened recently. GDPR is a great kind of framework for us to think this through as well, but one is some work that OSF has done in terms of technology utilization when it comes to refugee and migration issues and how to collect data in a responsible way. I know there's some work that our sister organization, Moderator Networks, has done with Ethical OS, which is about kind of a holistic approach to designing technology from a humanistic perspective to mitigate downside risk. And then the third one is self-promoting what we've done, which is called the WEST Principles, which is a set of principles designed specifically for collecting data from workers in a way that again, is done in a responsible way. So I think this body, because it is so significant in its ability to organize and bring together a disparate group of people, has the organizing power to set some standards and to really help push that conversation forward as well.
That's really helpful, Killian. I think you crystallized something really important there. Thank you. Last call for interjections. I have one here. I have Hannah, Claire, Kelly. Anybody else? Yes, Davina. I need to keep a list. All right, so we'll start. I think there were 2 here, actually. Yes, please.
So, hi, my name is Charlena Powell, and I wanted to provide a recognition to what we have here. I'm a survivor leader here at the Delta Code 8.7 conference alongside the United Nations University. We really are discussing a rather unusual subject in the eyes of a survivor, which is artificial intelligence and computational science. And as we work towards various actionable goals with all these critical partners in the room to end modern slavery by 2030, I'm here to offer a more practical assurance. And survivors who are watching here on the live stream on TV, just want you to know that you're not alone. And we know for sure now that something or somebody is literally watching you at all times. And with that being said, do better in your business. Be kinder in connecting with people or entities on purpose. And stay woke. Stay woke in articulating your voice and the input that you have at the table. And when it's necessary, interrupt what you thought was normal and design your own kind of big data sourcing that works for you. Whether it be focused on healing mechanisms or economic stability, just know that you are and can be in control of your tomorrow and live what you create every day. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlena. Next to you.
Thank you. And, I want to just reiterate what you very eloquently just said. And, as I think we're the only two survivors left in the room right now. But, the bottom line and the one thing that I want everybody here to be cognizant of is the fact that survivors are the bottom line of your data. And they are the reason why everybody is here. And so, when our data is being used, when our stories are being told over and over, but there is no recognition for the value and the dignity of where we came from and where we are, and when we can't see the applicable data being put forward. So, in other words, we're mining data and you're taking something very personal and something that is very, very traumatic, but also something that is of great importance to us. And when you're taking that and you're putting it out there in terms to monetize it or to get funders to support your organization, just recognize the fact that we as survivors, at the end of the day, we want to see what is it that's going to not just help us, but everybody else? Where is that going to support us with housing, with healthcare, with mental health issues, with all of the things that follow us? Because this isn't just a 12-step program where we graduate and we're healed. This is a continual thing, and with this data, it's very difficult when you have organizations over and over and over saying we want to survey you, we want to use this information, and then nothing is done with it. So I think again, another call to action, and I really appreciated what Killian was saying earlier, the fact that we have to be mindful of who we're dealing with and bring it back down to a human level. Because if we can do that, then you are going to get the information that you want from survivors. I will tell you, we are a wealth of knowledge, but we also have a very deep well and communication that is not on the surface. And so if one organization mistreats a survivor or utilizes them or uses them and re-exploits them, then you're not going to get them to participate. So if we start breaking that cycle, we start breaking the cycle of violence that continues to happen, and we open up the level of communication that we all have to have.
Thanks so much. I think we can only learn from listening very closely to that advice from those last two speakers. Claire, you were next.
Hi everyone, my name's Claire Gollop from National Policing in the UK. Is that working?
Yes, you might just
yeah, I know what upset, thank you. I'm speaking now with a very practical, very, very small kind of focused point after the points that we've just heard, and with kind of intense respect for them. If we go and look for this, and we are all committed to going and looking for this kind of harm, we are going to find it. And we're going to find it on such a large scale that we have to ready all the other systems
for the finding of it, be that the health and social care and housing and other things that are fundamental, but also from my perspective, the criminal justice system. So one of the really big challenges that we face in prosecuting in the UK these kind of cases, it is one of an evidential level of the level of evidence which we can bring forward. There are inherent challenges that affect these kind of cases, or impact more on these kind of cases than they do on others. We rely more on the scene and the contextual information in trafficking and slavery cases than we do in some other kinds of crime. And increasingly that context is digital and involves devices and huge amounts of data. So it's just an urge to urge you really, as we start to think about all the risk modelling and all those kind of things, to think about the evidential impact at the end. Also to perhaps harness the energy of this kind of group alongside those who are working it to improve forensic potential and encourage and use the advocacy of the reason why it's so important to do that.
Thanks, Claire. A lot to digest there as well. Hannah Tinyan.
Okay. I was just going to say that from United Nations University Institute on Computing and Society, we're an institute looking at ICT for development, particularly human-computer interaction, so developing the interfaces for the tools. And if you believe, organizing committee, that our expertise would be helpful, we'd love to volunteer.
Kelly.
We can pretty much all agree that the general consensus in the room is around how productive the last couple of days have been. But I think that we may be experiencing a tiny bit of a selection bias, not to be a pessimist here, but I think there is an inherent skepticism from both camps or multiple camps. I think it seems that there is some division between what people think of as local and global, and big and small data. I mean, I think it can be intimidating for some people working in the field to think about solving slavery literally from space, right? And so, I mean, that can't be further removed from humans, right? But then I think in the reverse, there, I'm sure, are people that think that they could probably solve all of these issues, or rather this issue, with a silver bullet, without understanding that modern slavery is really more of a maybe mosaic-looking, overlapping set of issues and circumstances and vulnerabilities. So I think maybe it's important for the organizing committee to really think about, as we sort of web outward, how to tackle some of the skepticism in multiple communities, and certainly doing this by trying to speak the same language. So, I mean, by trying to convey that, you know, even if you're in a local community, in an NGO, big data doesn't mean a global data source. It can mean tons and tons of text that you have in your filing cabinets, right? And modern slavery means so many different things, and it includes so many different people from so many different places. So just, yeah, and it's the same problem with narrowing and broadening. I understand totally, but yes, I think spreading this message and trying to get more people on board by speaking some sort of common language would really help.
Thanks, Kelly. An important and timely call for nuanced communication, I think. The last word goes to Davina. No pressure.
Well, I am sorry that is the last word. I'm hoping you'll conclude, James, and save me from the shame of it. But so aside from volunteering, of course, Statistics Without Borders to whatever capacity we can help, of course, that includes Bayesian analysts, a lot of machine learning. There's a lot of capacity there. And a lot of our members are actually retired statisticians that have been doing a lot of things for a long time and are very eager to use their skills. They also have a lot of time, so there's that. The other component was to what Casey had mentioned, that Dominique and I and a few others are on a National Science Foundation committee, I would say, where we're looking at joining human trafficking researchers and operational science researchers, and it's been really fascinating, and I think to the same way that they could contribute, that group could contribute, and a lot of those other researchers could add a lot to this discussion. Thanks.
That's very helpful volunteering of additional capabilities, Davina. All right, are there any final burning interventions from anyone? Or from social media, Ben? No, you don't want to fake a question? No? Okay. Well, it's been a long, extremely rich 2 days. I don't have anything particularly profound to say, but I do think some very profound things were just said. So I'm going to, if I may, borrow your words, Charlena, because I think they're as relevant for all of us as they were to the audience that you spoke to. And in return, I would like to ask if you would gavel us out, since the gaveling has been... So the two things that Charlena said that really caught my attention just then were interrupt normal programming if necessary. I know, as people have pointed out, we need to be cautious about moving fast and breaking things, especially when there are human lives in the mix here. But I do think that there is a time for interrupting normal programming, and perhaps this is one of those times. And the final one, very short but very powerful, thank you, Charlena, was stay woke. So please do stay woke. We hope to be back with another Code 8.7 event or process of some kind very soon. I know the organising committee will work towards that. Thank you all so much. Thank you to my team who've made this possible. Oh yes, thank you, Emily, always, and Alex, always timely. They asked me to remind you to please fill out the survey. That's the URL. Please go there now if you'd like to and start filling it out. It's very quick, we promise.
If we want more ideas from people about what the next event might focus on thematically, can they add it to that survey?
They can. There's a free text section, I believe, near the end. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you to my team. Alex is in the room this time, so she'll get to hear me thank her for all that she's done, returning passports to people and things. Please pick up your passport before you go to JFK. Good luck with the snow. We'll see you again. And finally, before Charlena gavels us out, stay woke.